10 plagues. 10 disasters. For thousands of years, we thought they were divine punishment. But scientists discovered something shocking. They were a chain reaction, a scientific domino effect. And it all started with algae. 500 years ago, Egypt was the greatest civilization on Earth. The Nile was its lifeline, bringing water, fish, and fertile soil. Then came the plagues. Exodus describes 10 catastrophes that brought Egypt to its knees. Water turning to blood, frogs, insects, disease, darkness, death. The Bible frames them as divine acts, Moses versus Pharaoh, God versus the gods of Egypt. But modern science asks a different question: could they all be natural disasters? In the 1990s, epidemiologists and environmental scientists proposed a radical theory. Every plague could be explained by a single environmental trigger, creating a domino effect. Plague 1: Water to blood. Exodus says the Nile turned to blood. Fish died. The water stank. Egyptians couldn't drink it. Scientists point to toxic algal blooms, red tides, caused by oscillatory eruptions or similar species. These algae explode in warm, nutrient-rich conditions, caused by drought, flooding, or volcanic ash fertilizing the water. They produce toxins that suffocate fish and turn water blood red. What triggered the bloom? 3 theories: extreme drought concentrating nutrients, catastrophic flooding washing fertilizer into the Nile, or volcanic ash from Santorini's eruption. Plague 2: Frogs. With the water toxic and fish dead, frogs fled the Nile en masse. Exodus describes them invading every house, bed, and oven. Frogs breathed through their skin, they couldn't survive the poisoned water. But on land, exposed to heat and without water, the frogs died by the millions. Exodus says they piled them in heaps. The stench was unbearable, and their rotting bodies created the perfect breeding ground for the next disaster. Dead frogs attract flies. Flies lay eggs. Eggs become larvae. And within days, Egypt faced an insect explosion unlike anything in history. 2 plagues down. 8 to go. And the chain reaction was just beginning. The plagues followed a geographic pattern. Starting at the Nile, spreading through the delta, reaching every city and village. The science is clear, each plague set up the next. But there's a bigger question. What triggered the first plague? Many scientists point to this: Santorini. Around 1600 BCE, it erupted in one of history's most violent volcanic events. The ash would have reached Egypt. If you think frogs were bad, imagine waking up to this. Billions of biting insects. No escape. No relief. And they were just getting started. Plagues 3 and 4, Gnats and Flies. Exodus describes gnats covering the dust of Egypt. Scientists identify them as culicoids, biting midges. Bred in the rotting frog carcasses, they emerged by the billions. Then came larger flies, stable flies, horseflies, aggressive biters. Exodus says swarms of flies filled Pharaoh's palace and all Egypt. The insect pressure was relentless. These insects were disease vectors. When they bit livestock and humans, they transmitted bacteria, viruses, and parasites. Which brings us to Plague 5. Plague 5, Livestock disease. Egyptian livestock were kept in open fields, fully exposed to the insect swarms. Biting flies transmitted diseases like anthrax, blue tongue, and African horse sickness. Within days, Egypt's livestock were decimated. Cattle, horses, donkeys, camels, all dead. The economic catastrophe was total. Egypt's food supply, transportation, and military power collapsed. But Exodus says the Israelites' livestock in Goshen were spared. Why? They lived separately, upstream, potentially outside the insect range. Or they kept animals in shelters, protected from biting flies. Plague 6, Boils. The same insects that killed livestock now bit humans. They transmitted skin infections, possibly glanders or cutaneous anthrax. Painful boils and sores broke out across Egypt. Exodus says even Pharaoh's magicians were afflicted. They couldn't stand before Moses. The insect-borne disease had reached the palace itself. 4 plagues from one source. Dead frogs bred insects. Insects transmitted disease to animals. Then to humans. A perfect biological chain reaction. But while Egypt struggled with insects and disease, something was happening in the atmosphere. Something that would make the first 6 plagues look like a warning. Santorini's eruption was one of the largest in human history. It sent 60 cubic kilometers of ash into the atmosphere. Winds carried it east, directly toward Egypt. And when it arrived, it changed everything. 6 plagues down. 4 to go. And now, the disasters were no longer local, they were cosmic. Egyptians, already devastated by water, frogs, insects, and disease, looked up. The sky was changing. And the worst was yet to come. Water turned red from algae. Frogs fled the toxic Nile and died on land. Their corpses bred billions of insects. The insects spread disease to livestock, then humans. 6 plagues. All connected. All triggered by environmental catastrophe. But the chain reaction wasn't over. Fire and ice. Falling from the heavens. Destroying everything in their path. The Bible calls it hail and fire mingled together. Science calls it atmospheric catastrophe. Plague 7, hail and fire. Volcanic ash creates perfect conditions for violent storms. Ash particles generate static electricity, triggering massive lightning strikes. They also seed hailstone formation in supercooled clouds. Exodus says hail struck down everything in the fields, man, beast, and plant. Lightning started fires that spread through the hail. Fire mingled with hail, a phenomenon possible in volcanic ash storms. Egypt's early crops, barley and flax, were completely destroyed. But late-season wheat and spelt survived. That detail matters, because it set up the next plague. Plague 8, locusts. Locust swarms are still one of nature's most devastating disasters. Billions of insects moving as one, devouring every plant in their path. Egypt experienced this 3,500 years ago. Volcanic ash disrupts climate patterns, creating humidity and temperature shifts perfect for locust breeding. Exodus says an east wind brought them. That's exactly how locust swarms arrive from the Arabian Peninsula to this day. The swarm covered the ground until it was black. They ate every plant, every tree, everything the hail had left. Exodus says nothing green remained in all of Egypt. The famine was total. Plague 9, darkness. Then came the darkness. Exodus says it lasted 3 days and was so thick it could be felt. Not a storm. Not an eclipse. Something worse. Volcanic ash clouds can create darkness thick enough to feel. Modern eruptions show how. Particulate density so high it blocks all sunlight. Egypt experienced this for 3 days straight. But Exodus says the Israelites in Goshen still had light. Why? Prevailing winds. The ash cloud could have bypassed Goshen, leaving the settlement in the clear while Egypt choked in darkness. 9 plagues. Water poisoned. Frogs invading. Insects swarming. Livestock dead. Skin infections. Crops destroyed twice. Darkness blocking the sun. Egypt was broken. Economically. Psychologically. Spiritually. Pharaoh faced an impossible choice. Let the Israelites go and admit defeat? Or hold on and watch Egypt die? 9 times he'd hardened his heart. The 10th plague would break it. 9 plagues down. 1 to go. The deadliest. The most controversial. And the hardest to explain. Exodus 12. The night of Passover. God would strike down every firstborn in Egypt, from Pharaoh's son to the prisoner's child. Only homes marked with lamb's blood would be spared. But could this plague have a natural explanation too? At midnight, the screaming began. In every Egyptian home, the firstborn son was dead. From the palace to the prison. No family was spared. The Bible calls it God's judgment. Science offers 2 theories. Plague 10, death of the firstborn. Theory 1, mycotoxins. After the hail and locusts, Egypt's grain stores were damaged. Moisture got in. Mold grew, aspergillus or stachybotrys, producing deadly mycotoxins. In Egyptian culture, the firstborn received the largest food portions. They ate more contaminated grain. They died first. In ancient cultures, firstborns weren't just favored, they were fed first and most. Archaeological evidence confirms this pattern across Near Eastern societies. If the food was poisoned, they'd be the first to die. Theory 2, carbon dioxide. Volcanic activity can release CO2 that accumulates in low-lying areas. Egyptians slept on ground level. Israelites on raised platforms or elevated homes. The firstborn, often sleeping in the lowest, coolest spots, suffocated while others survived. Scientists debate these theories. Mycotoxins explain the cultural pattern, firstborns ate more. Carbon dioxide explains the geographic pattern, Egyptians versus Israelites. Both are plausible. Neither is proven. But here's the question that science can't answer. The timing. Each plague arrived exactly when Moses warned. Goshen was spared, repeatedly. The sequence was perfect. Was that coincidence? Or does natural mechanism prove divine orchestration? At midnight, Pharaoh summoned Moses. His son was dead. Egypt was destroyed. After 10 plagues, his will finally broke. Go. Take your flocks. Leave. Just go. 10 dominoes. 10 plagues. 1 chain reaction. Santorini's eruption, 60 cubic kilometers of ash, tsunami waves, climate chaos, reached Egypt around 1600 BCE. The timeline aligns with the Exodus period. One cataclysmic event could have triggered the entire cascade. So does science erase the miracle? Not necessarily. Many believers argue that natural mechanisms don't negate divine action, they reveal it. The precision, the timing, the warnings, the protection of Goshen. Maybe the question isn't miracle or nature, but miracle through nature. Science explains how. Faith asks why. These plagues aren't just ancient history. Algal blooms, locust swarms, volcanic eruptions, climate cascades. They still devastate communities today. The 10 plagues show us how fragile civilization is when nature turns against us. From algae to death. Red tide triggers frog exodus. Dead frogs breed insects. Insects spread disease. Volcanic ash creates storms and locust conditions. Darkness falls. Contaminated food or CO2 kills the firstborn. A perfect domino effect. What do you think? Does science explain the plagues, or does it prove divine timing? Drop your thoughts below. For more biblical mysteries, check out our series on Sodom and Gomorrah and the 4 horsemen. Subscribe for deep dives into history's greatest controversies. Thank you for watching. See you next time.